Education is what's important. Training, preparation for the expected. Education, preparation for the unexpected.
To all who shall see these presents, greetings. On behalf of Marine Corps University, the Marine Corps University Foundation, and the Krulak Center for Innovation and Future Warfare, welcome back to the Brutcast, our series designed to connect the worlds of the warfighter and PME with the best in innovative and creative thought. I'm your host, Major Nate Janikin, Operations Officer at the Krulak Center. Before we begin, please remember that all opinions expressed here are those of the individual and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Krulak Center, Marine Corps University, United States Marine Corps, or any other agency of the U.S. government. We're recording this episode on October 8th, 2024, a year and one day after Hamas led a surprise attack on Israel. Since then, we've watched the Israeli response along with the global reaction to the ongoing conflict. On the 17th and 18th last month, thousands of handheld pagers and walkie-talkies being used by Hezbollah exploded simultaneously across Lebanon and Syria. This was followed 2 weeks later on the 1st of October with an Israeli military operation into southern Lebanon, and Israel stating that they had been conducting small covert raids in the country for months. Today, we have both of our previous co-hosts back to discuss what's been going on since our last episodes with each of them. So Dr. Tarzi is the Director of Middle East Studies here at Marine Corps University. He's also a Senior Fellow for the Program on the Middle East at the Foreign Policy Research Institute. Previously, he worked with the Regional Analysis Team focused on Afghanistan and Pakistan for Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. He was a Senior Research Associate for the Middle East at the Center for Non-Proliferation Studies at the Monterey Institute of International Studies, where he also taught graduate seminar courses on Middle East security policies and threat perceptions focusing on Egypt, Iran, Iraq, and Israel. He has appeared on several media outlets and has been published in numerous journals and newspapers. Dr. Christopher Anzalone is a research assistant professor with Middle East Studies and the Krulak Center. He has a PhD in Islamic, Middle Eastern, and African Studies from McGill University, a master's in Near Eastern Studies from Indiana University Bloomington, and a double bachelor's in History and Religious Studies from George Mason University. He was previously a research fellow with the International Studies Program at the Balfour Center for Science and International Affairs at Harvard University's JFK School of Government. He has also published and lectured extensively on non-state armed groups in Africa, the Middle East, and South Asia, as well as on political Islam and Muslim social movements and organizations. So when we open up, gentlemen, I'd like to start off, Dr. Tarzi, with giving you an opportunity to make any kind of opening comments.
Thank you very much. As Major Yannick said, we are a year, one day after the horrific attacks against the State of Israel by Hamas. And what I like to say in the beginning is as we are going to discuss the current events and the expansion of the war, both into Lebanon, and again, here I have to say that on October 8, 2023, exactly a year from today, it was not Israel, but rather Lebanon that started launching sporadic rocket attacks into northern Israel in support, at the time, Nasrallah, who is now killed by Israel, the head of head of Hezbollah, saying that this was in support of Hamas and what happened the day before, a year ago. So Israel started launching that, but also there was an expansion of the area of operation by Israel, some claimed by them, some assume that Israel has done. And here specifically, the three countries that were targeted was Syria, but mainly both Hezbollah targets in Syria as well as Iranian targets. In Yemen, specifically going against the Houthi targets. And again, here I want to say that Houthis also began launching longer range ballistic missiles into Israel. But I would believe that the most significant change in here has been the direct confrontation between the State of Israel and the Islamic Republic of Iran. And we'll discuss that more, myself and my colleague, Dr. Anzalone. But let me put a context, if I may, before we even move on, is what October 7th, 2003 meant for Israel. It is, as we have stated before, the most devastating loss of Jewish life since the Second World War. The whole aspect of the State of Israel's re-emergence, rebirth in 1948 was to allow sovereignty and a safe haven for Jews from being killed, burned, and this, while it was episodic, but it was on the soil of the State of Israel. The role of the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, the role of the state is safeguarding its citizens within that state. And October 7th shattered that understanding. The understanding that IDF, whether IDF things that they do outside the borders of Israel, that of course is like any other military, but within the borders, they have this very, very specific duty of safeguarding Jewish life within the only Jewish state. Also, it deteriorated the public of Israel's reverence, if you would, and also trust to IDF. IDF has always been historically the most trusted organization of the government in Israel, by far, always. And that began to erode. The second group that was, if not blamed, lost credibility was the intelligence community. Again, Israel always prided itself in having one of the top intelligence communities, penetrating not only to its enemies around like Hezbollah or Hamas, but also into Iran and then beyond. And what happened on October 7th also damaged that. What has happened since has been one thing Israel has tried to do is to re-establish that deterrence in many ways, not only by going into the Hamas stronghold, but also to, as in the recent few weeks, going into Lebanon and killing very, very high level targets within Hezbollah, including their very, very important personality, their leader, and Hassan Nasrallah, but also going against Iran. And this is where I stop. If you look back on October 7th last year, the Israelis from day one said, yes, this was Hamas, but if you really want to know who behind was that in a way, Hamas was the puppet, but the puppeteer was Iran. So that aspect was already there. And that expansion, I think, is very important because now we are having Iran, a threshold nuclear state, with Israel, a presumed nuclear state, almost at each other. They have already at least exchanged fire, and we are, at least the conventional wisdom is saying that Israel is going to respond to the latest Iranian attack of over 200 ballistic missiles. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Anzalone, I'll pass it over to you for your comments as well.
Thank you very much, Major Jenikin, and to Dr. Tarzi. So I would just say, to start off with, that the reverse has happened with Hezbollah. Hezbollah had built up over since 2006, sort of the past couple of decades, this image of itself in Lebanon as well as regionally as being very skilled, both at its sort of politically, militarily, in terms of building up its armaments, but also through its intelligence services. And what has happened in just really less than a month, almost all of that has been shattered. Not only because Nasrallah, so Nasrallah, of course, was the head of the snake, if you will, but almost the entire senior command and control structure militarily within Hezbollah has been decimated. Its intelligence chief was killed a couple of weeks ago. It's sort of the presumed successor to Nasrallah. We don't know for sure, but it seems that he was killed probably last Friday, just a few days ago, before the weekend started. So this image of that Hezbollah had carefully constructed over several decades of it being very competent has been really shattered, and that's going to have reverberations not only for it, but also for the Islamic Republic and also for other sort of so-called axis of resistance member groups, particularly the Houthis sort of across the region, that domestically it's going to affect Hezbollah. Even if Hezbollah survives to some degree intact. Domestically, it's this image and this sort of power that it's built for itself, which was already under strain before last October because of the very dire economic situation, unemployment. It's high unemployment in Lebanon. It was already strained. That this will really change a lot on the ground domestically and regionally.
Yeah, so I think my first question will go to you, Dr. Anzalone, because the pager and walkie-talkie event happened in the middle of September. So I think my first question is what was the greatest impact to Hezbollah because of that attack?
So the most fundamental, from what we can tell now, the most fundamental sort of effect was sort of twofold. One was both related to the same thing, which is trust. Trust within Hezbollah internally itself, sort of its own sort of internal security and intelligence sort of gathering up sort of mechanisms and processes that, there were Hezbollah members, from what we know, this is all open source, that were tasked in around, I think, 2015, 2016 to purchase or begin purchasing some of this quote unquote low tech equipment to try to blunt some of the Israeli intelligence services vastly superior technological sort of capabilities. That these were people within Hezbollah that were tasked with doing that, as well as business people that were and are close to the organization. So internally, I think we're going to see a lot of, and there are signs that this has already happened, of a lot of distrust. And then we have this sort of rapid succession of targeted strikes that have taken out, now over half a dozen senior Hezbollah commanders and leaders, aside from Nasrallah. And then you have Nasrallah at the top, and then probably Hashim Safiuddin, his presumed successor. And then the second sort of issue of trust, it seems, is between, and Dr. Tarzi can speak much more about this, between Iran and Hezbollah itself, that the levels of trust and also the interpersonal relationships. I mean, Nasrallah was a product, for lack of a better word, of a very intensely close interpersonal relationship with the supreme leader of Iran, which I think is going to be very difficult for Hezbollah, and for Iran to duplicate. I mean, you can replace a leader, you can replace a commander, but you cannot replace all of the sort of the interpersonal connections that those figures forged, between these relationships. I think that's going to be very difficult for Hezbollah and Iran to reestablish. And so there is a level. So how can Hezbollah, which in 2006 built up this, again, reputation of having a very flexible command and control structures in the south, for example, with the central leadership in presumably in southern suburbs of Beirut, if they have to constantly be in hiding and out of contact because they don't trust people within their own organization. I think that's going to be the most profound effect that's going to steer and will determine whether Hezbollah continues, and if it does, in what form and lethality and capacity that it's able to continue operating as a militant organization specifically. Thank you.
So if they were using pagers and walkie-talkies as a low-tech method for communication, how much lower tech are they getting? Are we talking carrier pigeons and snail mail at this point to communicate to each other? Do we know?
I mean,
how
that's an excellent question, and I think that we can look at some of the other sort of, I mean, Hezbollah is really kind of a quasi-state, but a non-state. So yes, through messengers, through, like, I give you this thing and a letter or something on a flash drive, and I send you physically go and deliver it from me to John or John Doe. I'm sure it's not going to be a Jane Doe probably, but a John Doe, right? So you deliver it from me to Ali or Hassan or whomever, but that's going to, that will work. But as we saw with Bin Laden, there are problems with that too, if those people are identified and tracked. And also, even if it does work security-wise, it's going to slow down their communications. And something else that in 2006, one of the primary goals of the IDF in terms of in the media sphere was to take out Al-Manar, which is the Hezbollah satellite television station. And I was a student. I was in Jordan, actually, so right next door. And Al-Manar never went off the air. I mean, the main broadcast towers and nodes were taken out almost right away in that war of a month and 33 days or whatever it was. But Al-Manar never went off the air. So we take that sort of, again, this image of supreme competence, if you will, and now sort of reverse it, basically, that everything that Hezbollah had built up for itself in the eyes of other Lebanese, in the eyes of the region, even people who didn't like them, countries or parties that didn't like them. All of that, I think, a lot of that, if not all of it, I think is gone.
So going to the relationship side, Dr. Tarzi, I'll come over to you. Dr. Anzalone mentioned that relationship between Hezbollah and Iran. So what does that look like now with the leadership, gone?
Yeah, that is a very important point that my colleague made, and the fate of Safiuddin, the presumed successor, is unknown. And let us remember that Safiuddin, while doesn't have the theological and length of relationship, he's actually a son-in-law of none other than Qasim Soleimani, the former head of the Quds forces of the Iran's revolutionary, Islamic Revolution Guard Corps, which was killed by the United States in 2020. So this is Dr. Anzalone said it, but it has to be emphasized that this relationship was very, very tight. So if he's indeed eliminated as well, that is a major gap in the relationship. And the other thing, again, it was alluded to, is trust. Look, Hezbollah came to being because of the Israeli invasion in 1982 and Iran's efforts through, my apologies, Iran's efforts through its long-standing, even pre-revolution, pre-1979 relationship between the Shia communities in Lebanon and Iran to create Hezbollah, which is the jewel, if you would, in the crown of the so-called axis of resistance or the proxies. This is the closest relationship Iran has had with one of its allies. I would even say Hezbollah is beyond a proxy as an alliance. But when you look at it today, I think Nasrallah, he's dead now, but he miscalculated two things in my view. What he miscalculated, number one, was he really thought Israel was very weak. He looked at October 7, 23 as something that could be replicated. And that Israel was really weak, and that one mistake, if you would, was systematic within the Israeli system. That was mistake number one. Mistake number two goes back to your question. I believe that Nasrallah overestimated its Iranian allies' power and resolve. And as you go forward, well, now he's dead. As you go forward, whoever takes over Hezbollah will have that in their mind. That at the end of the day, Hezbollah is saying always that Hezbollah's main effort is not Iran, it's Lebanon. That falls short. They are a popular movement within Lebanon. Don't forget, they have the most amount of seats within the Lebanese parliament. I think if there was another election very soon, given this what happened, given the fact that the economy of Lebanon is tanked, given the blast that happened at Beirut port, which was blamed on Hezbollah, and Hezbollah's lack of responsibility towards the Lebanese people is going to cost them in the long run their political capital. And I think that's irreversible for now, no matter who comes in. And that is very crucial. And without Hezbollah, and this is now I talk from the Iranian side, Iran always counted on Hezbollah, that Hezbollah will do their bidding if a war with Israel came in, or to punish Israel for anything against Iran. That also, first of all, they have been degraded militarily, intelligence. We discussed all of that. Israel now has a presence right on the border, looking at all the tunnels and everything that Hezbollah had dug. According to Israelis, the intention was to do a October 7th type attack in the Galilee in northern Israel. With that diminished, but also I think, and this is more important in a way, because you can replace tunnels, you can replace weaponry, but you cannot replace confidence very quickly. So if Hezbollah believes that they're in it alone, and what is in it for me at the end of the day, I think Iran may lose a major ally to do its bidding. And for Israel, that is one of the greatest objectives. Israel has never wanted Lebanese territory, ever. The Sheba Farm, those listeners who understand that, Israel doesn't believe that's Lebanese. They believe that's part of Syria. Other than that, there has not been a dispute over territorial aspects with Lebanon. They want Lebanon, and I don't think Israelis are naive to know that the Shias in Lebanon will just disappear. They are the majority. What they have always wanted is a Lebanon that's not against Israel. The second option was to keep buffers, and none of those worked. It was deterrence. Right now, I think when you look at what's happening, it's softened on Lebanon, but also it has taken the confidence of Iran and the ability of Iran to use Hezbollah as a proxy. And that I think is looking at it geopolitically and strategically for the long run, that I think is very significant.
So I think you answered the question about whether Iran would continue to support Hezbollah, but it sounded like there might be an issue with maybe Hezbollah doesn't necessarily want to have that relationship back with.
Look, they will, if Iran will support them. There's no way. Iran will support them. This is a long-established relationship. Iran will support them. Iran will try to cultivate whoever else comes up. Somebody will come up. Now, question is whether Iran will have a lot of say on who comes up, or how much of Iranian word they will accept. They may take Iran's money. They are desperate. But I think what I'm trying to say is I think that trust relationship, the symbiotic relationship, is shattered. I'm not saying shattered forever, but it is shattered for the foreseeable future. Is the relationship finished? Absolutely not. There is a theological relationship which does not exist with Yemen, and certainly does not exist with Hamas. Hamas is Sunni, Iran is Shia. The only group of the close groups, other than the Iraqi Shias and some Syrians, Hezbollah. Hezbollah is from the same school of thought as Iran is. Not only that, their leadership has, my colleague can speak much more to this, they're much more from the same trends within Shiism as well. So there are those relationships which cannot be severed closely. But I think there's an opportunity for Israel to make Lebanon a more independent country and not dependent on Iran. Iran will try to keep the interdependency as strong as possible, of course.
And I think over to Dr. Anzalone, could Hezbollah exist without Iranian support? Like, do they need Iranian money and equipment in order to continue doing whatever they're doing?
I would answer that in two ways. So to exist, to continue existing at the levels, sort of not only militarily, but also in terms of their social services, to operate the same capacity, yes, they do need the Islamic Republic. They need not necessarily the Islamic Republic, but who else is going to fund them to that level? They need an external sponsor. The caveat to that is that, as Dr. Tarzi just mentioned, that we always have to, we must remember that Hezbollah has built a very strong constituency for itself among many, not all, and I think that's very important. There's the last elections a few years ago in 2021, if memory serves, or 22, was the first time that independent Lebanese Shiite candidates, only a few, but for the first time since the civil war ended in 1990, 90 to 92, won seats in strongholds of Hezbollah, basically, and against the threat of assassination. Hezbollah has assassinated sort of independent Lebanese Shiite voices and other critics. So that happened before all of 2023, October of 23. So it has a very strong social base of support, and that domestic support, those people, many of those people do contribute money and services and work. We've seen sort of strikes on some of the sort of key nodes of Hezbollah's social services structures just in the last less than a week, since the weekend, basically. But it would not, so it would need external support at the level that it gets from Iran to continue at the capacity that it was going up to this point. But it's not going to disappear if that goes away. It'll be much harder for them. Militarily, it's a whole nother story. But in terms of like the whole organization, it does require external support from a, in this case, a rogue state.
And then I think the next thing, so one of the things that came up when, everyone around the world learned of the Israeli attack into Lebanon was they had also, openly stated, hey, they've been conducting raids in Lebanon for months. So I think my question is why, if you've been conducting raids for months, why now launch a much larger operation, into Lebanon and basically show everybody that now you're definitely there?
Okay. Israel has, this is Israeli words, the campaigns between wars. This has been going on for a long time. Some have been claimed by Israel. Some people in the media have assumed that this has been Israel doing them. Whether it's been targets in Syria, Lebanese targets in Syria, weapon depots, troop movements, whatever that Israel has thought that would be dangerous to its own security in the Golan and the northern parts, the eastern part of Israel. They have gone after targets in Iraq. They have gone after targets in Iran, presumably. Again, most of these were either assassinations of scientists. So that has been a campaign between wars. And in Lebanon, Israel basically had Lebanon has no air defense, or if it has, it's been very ineffective. Israel has been flying sorties almost at will over Lebanon. They have had some confrontations at sea. So that has been ongoing. I think what changed was, and let me take you again back to last year. As I said, Hezbollah is the first one that launched attacks against Israel after October the 7th. And there was a war of attrition with some understanding. And those listeners who remember the 2006 war, after that finished, there was a understanding between Hezbollah and Israel. There was no treaty, but there was understanding what is acceptable. And this war of attrition that began last year in October, the understanding, again, this is unspoken understanding, or unsigned understanding, was that Hezbollah will use limited range rockets, not missiles, in northern Israel. Almost 65 to 70,000 Israelis have been moved out of their homes and right on across the Lebanese border. And Israel will raid with the same amount of power, but they would basically go after some military targets. They would go after some communication targets. And that has been ongoing since, as I said, since a year. What changed is there are a few things. One, I think Israel's calculation was that Hezbollah wanted to launch a October 7th style attack into the Galilee. That is very important. And for Israel, that was unacceptable. That is their main reason. Second reason is that, this is in the media, that there might have been, and I personally do not buy that there might have been some leakage within Hezbollah on the potential of the walkie-talkies and the pagers. So Israel thought that rather than losing that asset, it is good time to use it. And then the third one is Iran related directly. The intensification of war between Iran and Israel and this is my personal views, I know you said it in the beginning, the intensification of this has made Israel more aware of the Iranian threat as such and dealing with that. And in order to deal with the Iranian threat, they can handle Hamas and they can handle the Houthis. The biggest threat to Israel would have been a fully armed, fully capable Hezbollah to their north, launched with full force. In order to deal with Iran in a much higher intensity, they needed to eliminate that potential, and that has happened. And I think that's key.
So I want to circle back to something that you mentioned in your opening comments, Dr. Tarzi. You had said that the IDF had been one of the most trusted parts of the government.
Number one.
There. So I think my question is that both inside and outside Israel? And where do you think that level of trust is now, a year after the attacks on October 7th?
Okay, within Israel, I think, especially with what is happening in Lebanon and the attacks on Iran, for IDF, they have regained a lot of trust. The war in Gaza is not the war Israel wants, to be very blunt. This is why God even, this is a whole different thing. We discussed it in one of the early things. Israel was always wanted to keep Gaza, especially the current administration and power in Israel, current government. They wanted to keep Gaza basically managed. It was as far as they were concerned, it was a problem that could not be solved. So you manage it, you let somebody go in there from Qatar and others, and just don't look at it. And this is one reason the mistake happened. The damage and everything that's happened in Gaza has created some rifts, but within Israeli society, the IDF status has gone exceedingly up. We know of people, if Jewish Israelis, not Jewish Israelis, and some Jewish Americans who have actually gone back to Israel to enlist and volunteer for the IDF. So that has been, is it restored to the last as it was? That's hard to say because we don't have statistics, but I think that restoration of trust is there. The deterrence obviously has happened. The deterrence, what happened in Lebanon was a very big showcase. That's another reason why it happened, is to show that, no, we still can penetrate. And there's a reason why this is so much more successful than, let's say, in case of Hamas, because Israel never really looked at Hamas as a major threat, whereas they always looked at Hezbollah as a major threat. Since 2006, especially. Since 2006, end of that war, Israel has always been very concerned about Hezbollah, about their power, about their potential to attack, especially northern Israel, especially the city of Haifa, which was fully within range of Hezbollah's massive number of projectiles. I say projectiles because there were rockets, there were drones, and there were ballistic missiles. Pretty accurate. So they were much more penetrating into Hezbollah. Their intelligence was much more aware of Hezbollah. Their military was. That's why they were so successful. And they were neglecting, to be very blunt, the threat in Gaza. Now, outside of Israel, that's a big question. And this is a big question as we go forward, because this is not over. I think Nasrallah definitely thought IDF was weak and untrustworthy. And that's why he was doing all these maneuverings. And what broke the camel's back in a way for Israel was because, as I said, this war of attrition was going on for a year, since October the 8th last year, exactly a year today. In July, Hezbollah, whether it was an Arab part of Hezbollah, they launched a missile to the Golan and killed 12 people in a soccer pitch. And they were Druze actually. And for Israel, they were Israeli citizens. So it killed about 12 young Druze kids. For Israel, that was a change, at least within the public. But also there was this information that Israelis claimed that Hezbollah wanted to launch, as I said, and in my view also this issue of Iran. So Nasrallah made a mistake. Now the big question here is, what does Iran think? Do the authorities in Iran believe that, what they say is that IDF is basically a paper tiger, and if it's not from the United States, they will be crumbling in a day? That's their statements over and over and over again. That what happened on October 7th is the reality, and IDF basically stands on its ground, and they can do all this damage because of the United States. If that is their authentic view and not just their propaganda for outside, I think they may be in for a very, very rude awakening. IDF took its eye off of Gaza, and it's political. It's a whole different discussion. I don't think IDF was ever incapable of doing what it was doing. It was just more of a political decision on this part of the Israeli government not to look at the problem or the potential threats coming in from Gaza. They never took their eyes off of Iran nor from Hezbollah.
And then one question for Dr. Anzalone before we start talking about the rocket attacks, missile attacks from Iran. But is there I don't think we've talked about it in previous Axis of Resistance episodes that we've done, but is there a pecking order in terms of these proxies from Iran? Like, is there one that's considered, when they think about it, is there one that's more funded, more relationships over another? I think in this region, we're talking Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis. Do they consider one higher up than the other? And has that changed since everything that's happened in the last year?
So the short answer is exactly what Dr. Tarzi just said. Yes, there is a pecking order. And at the very, very top, by many, 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 many miles, was and is Hezbollah. I think Hamas is third in place, and the Houthis are somewhere kind of a weird player somewhere in the middle. So the Houthis have entirely their own interests. Their founding, Hezbollah would not exist without the Islamic Republic of Iran. The caveat I always add is that the one thing that they needed that I think, I'm not sure if Dr. Tarzi would agree, but that Iran is very good, has a history of being pretty good at, is taking advantage of opportunities that arise that they don't necessarily create. So the fact that the Lebanese, I won't get to sort of insider baseball, had a segment of Lebanese Shiite Islamists who were looking for something else rather than the existing Islamist party in the 1980s. That is something that then the Iranian ambassador in Damascus and the IRGC and others within the IRA were very adept at taking advantage of, and they built Hezbollah, or helped build Hezbollah, into sort of this behemoth, if you will, that it was prior to this summer, let's say. The Houthis their founding has nothing to do with Iran. They didn't have a particularly close, from what we can tell, until 2013, 2014. And one thing very quickly that I would add about Hezbollah's other importance, which I think has been dramatically, again, maybe like Dr. Tarzi said, maybe not shattered forever, but when Saddam Hussein was overthrown, and when the Iraqi Ba'ath Party was overthrown, and of course there's a whole history to that, who did the IRGC rely on to go and help organize some of these ragtag Iraqi Shiite Islamist militias? Hezbollah, Lebanese Hezbollah. I mean, so the fact that one of the key groups in Iraqi groups that keeps firing rockets and drones at our bases, at Israel, Kataib Hezbollah, the Hezbollah brigades, they take their name. We look at there's a very close relationship between that. Again, interpersonal relationships. Nasrallah and his predecessor as Secretary General of Hezbollah knew Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis, who we killed with Soleimani. With Soleimani, they knew each other from all the way back in the 70s. Right? These are interpersonal relationships that are very important. The Houthis, on the other, and when the Houthis began developing, moving closer to Iran, it was through Hezbollah. So if we look at any time you see sort of still images or video footage of the leader of the Houthi movement, Abdul Malik al-Houthi. He looks and mimics, I would say he mimics exactly Nasrallah. The Houthi satellite television station, the main one called Al Masira, was modeled after Al Manar. It looks exactly like Al Manar. When Abdul Malik speaks, everything is the same. The choreography, if you will, is exactly the same as when Nasrallah speaks. He modeled himself, his intonation, the way he speaks, the way that the television station broadcasts and quote unquote reports or frames sort of its propaganda messaging. All of that is based on Al Manar. So Hezbollah was, whether it will continue to be is sort of a big question mark, a key node in the relationship between these different so-called axis of resistance groups, so that they didn't have to, and often did not go directly, at least directly, straight line, I mean, through the IRI, that they also forge their own direct relationships. Like, for example, and I'll close with this, there are some signs in the last year that the Houthis are developing sort of direct relationships, partnerships with some of the Iraqi proxy groups as well.
I want to go now to talk about the Iranian missile attacks. So we had the Israeli crossing the border into Lebanon, and then the same day we had Iran shoot 200, I think it was a mix of rockets, missiles, and ballistic missiles into Israel. So I think my first question is, did Iran have to do that? Could they have had another response? And I feel like what they do is generally calculated. So what is the end result? Because I feel like, reading the news, there was some damage, but there wasn't a significant amount of damage that you would expect with that many projectiles. So what was their goal, I guess?
Look, the official response for Iran was because of the attack, not because of Nasrallah, even though if you look at Iran, in fact, what we both have said, the killing of Nasrallah was maybe the second hardest pill for the Iranian system or regime to have since the killing of Soleimani. However, the rationale they gave, the official one, was because of the attack in Iran by Israel. Israel never claimed it, but by Israel, of killing Haniya, who's the head of Hamas. Iran claims that it was a rocket attack, but from what the media says, it was actually somebody bombed, which is also a breach of intelligence within Iran. So Ismail Haniya he lived in Qatar and Doha. He was in Iran for the inauguration of the Pezeshkian, who is the current president of Iran, who was elected after the demise of Raisi in the helicopter crash. So Pezeshkian had a major inauguration, and one of the guests was none other than head of Hamas. And he was there. He met Khamenei, the supreme leader. Same day, he met the new president, and then he goes to the guest house, where it's the guest house of the IRGC, of the Islamic Revolution Guard Corps, and he gets killed. For Iran, this is not only an incredible embarrassment that their very, very important guest, who has a target on his back by the Israelis, gets killed inside their country. So the response was, as was the first attack that Iran launched against Israel, which was fully unsuccessful, their rationale for that was the killing of a few senior members of the IRGC by the Israelis and their consulate in Damascus. And what Iran said at the time was that the Damascus consulate actually represents Iranian soil, so this was an attack on Iranian soil, therefore Iran had to react. So this time, the stated rationale, was the killing of Haniya in Iran. And they had said that they're going to do it. Now, this happened right after Hezbollah my personal view is the planning was made before. Would the timing have changed if Nasrallah had not been killed? Perhaps. They were very angry at that, but as I said, that was the rationale. So for Iran, should have they done it or not, they have done it. It was, if they had not done anything, they were caught. These acts of Israel, or attributed to Israel, I have to say. Israel has claimed killing of Nasrallah. Israel has not claimed the killing of Haniyeh. Everybody assumes they did it, but they have not claimed it. These attacks compelled Iran to do something. And if they hadn't done anything, then they basically lose all credibility. By doing something, now they have opened the door for further Israeli retaliation. That was a gamble that they had to do. And there are people and the analysts who look at this as an Israeli baiting. The final word on this is that as former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett said it very bluntly. He's a politician now. He's not the prime minister. He said that Israel has a 1 in 50-year chance to basically get rid of the main threat and all these. So basically, the head of the octopus and not the tentacles, which is Iran. Iran has given Israel the opportunity by attacking Israel the first time, and then the second time, that they can go after Iran and denigrate Iran to a point militarily, and for Israel to push back the nuclear progress, and that Iran cannot support these groups or threaten Israel. So I think you have to see it in that way. They were put in because attack, as I said, the attack against Haniyeh came in their territory, and they had to do something. Now, they don't have the ability to carry out such attacks, clandestine attacks, or a targeted attack. So all they have, and this is one thing I'll say and I'll stop, we have to look at Iran's whole geopolitical military strategic system since the Gulf War. And I'm not going to go into details for time. The first Gulf War and engagements with the US, the so-called tanker wars, Praying Mantis, Nimble Archer, some old Marines will remember those. Iran understood that they cannot confront the United States directly. That was understood, and especially after our going into Iraq. They also understood that their Navy will be useless and their Air Force would be very, very weak. Their basically land forces would be not important. So what they did is they changed their policy, their doctrine, into swarming, multiplying the attack, and rockets. That doctrine was actually brought into IRGC by a man by the name of Ali Boff, who was a candidate, to push the threat away from the borders of Iran and punish the enemy away from it, either through proxies and swarming and bringing in a lot of smaller expendable drones, or that's why they have so many drones, small boats, or use rockets. So Iran has a lot of rockets, and they wanted to showcase that. But the question is, if this is the best they can do, Israel can take that punch. And then the question is what they're going to do now. So.
Yeah, I think my last question before we close it out as we get to the end of our hour here is, how did the country, because depending on where the rockets and missiles came from in Iran, you've got Iraq, Kuwait, Syria, Jordan, Saudi Arabia. How did Turkey, depending on where it came from, how did these other countries feel about the flight path going through their airspace?
It didn't go through Turkey. They are not happy. This is a major question. And this is one reason you see right now going what we hear in the media, the political wranglings, because Israel will respond. There's no question about that. They have to respond. I mean, somebody hit you that many rockets in your towns. the question is what kind of a response, and for Israel, that question comes in again: is the right of flight over, because most likely they may not just use missiles, or they may not use any missiles like that, because Israel has a very formidable air force, as we saw what they can do in Lebanon. So they have to fly over somebody, and there's only, I don't want to bring, but if you look at the map, they can only go over, there's one potential to go over only one country to get to Iran, but it's a big country. And now, how you do overflights over a major country which you do not have any diplomatic relationship. So that's number one. Number two is the reaction from Iran. Because if they can't get to Israel, Iran has vowed that they would go against American targets and potentially their allies in the Gulf. And those are very easy targets. Ours, we have only military targets in the region, but countries such as United Arab Emirates or Bahrain are very easy targets. And so Iranians have said if they go after our oil industry, which some people have speculated Israel will go after, that they would go after the oil industry of others, which is those countries. So I think what right now, those countries that overflight happen through them, they are very quiet. The first time, if you remember, Jordan actually intercepted some. This time, we don't know if anybody else did. We did. The United States did, and at least we know Britain did. But no, I think the countries in the region really don't want this happening, because they know that if this war escalates, they will get involved. And if they help Israel, they'll be involved. If they don't help Israel, they're the flight path, as you said. And they're basically caught between Iraq and a hard place. And I think for Israel and the United States, and all from what we hear, the idea is how to do something that there's a response that is adequate in the mind of the Israelis, but at the same time doesn't put in jeopardy the future of relationship between Israel and the Arab states that Israel calls the blessings, the Abraham Accord countries, and also doesn't drag the United States into this. So this is all the question. I think that now that is happening. I'll leave it at that. I want to also say one thing, because hopefully Marines are listening to that. In all of these the killings of Hezbollah leaders, there was one man killed that I just want to highlight, that he was actually the mastermind and involved directly in the bombings of Beirut. I just want to say that.
So coming to our closing comments here, Dr. Anzalone, Dr. Tarzi got the first crack at the opening comments. So I'll give you first crack at closing comments. So over to you.
Thank you. Yeah. So I would just say, that I think one of the things that's going to be very important to watch is what happens with as Dr. Tarzi had talked about just a little while ago, the sort of alliance proxy relationships between, and will they change not only between Hezbollah and Iran, but also what lessons the other sort of aligned groups within the axis of resistance will learn from this. So particularly those that already have a more not distant, but a more not as close a relationship historically with Iran. So the biggest, I think, not Hamas is not the important one, and that the Houthis are the important one for that. And what lessons do the Houthis, do they take any lessons? They may not take any lessons. The Houthi sort of history suggests that they are willing, they don't care about the suffering of Yemeni civilians, and they themselves are willing to undergo a lot of punishment, and it hasn't particularly, at least up to this point, changed their behavior. But if they're smart, and they're not stupid, if they're smart, what lessons do they learn about what has happened between Iran and Hezbollah specifically, or Iran and Hamas as well? And I'll leave it at that. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Dr. Tarzi, over to you for your closing comments.
I will actually take it a little bit even further at a higher perspective, and I say that for all of us here, especially for us in the PME world and the professional military education world, we need to look at this, whichever way this war turns out, and I hope that at the end of the day, saner minds prevail, and that Israel is secure, our allies are secure, our own troops are secure. That said, this is not just Middle East anymore. We, the United States, have been trying to get away from, pivot, if you would, from the Middle East away. And we understand that this war and this conflict right now, we don't talk about Russia and China. They are very much involved. They're watching it. On one hand, the fact that the United States is involved in it is good for them, because we are not paying attention to what our doctrine has always been, to try to kind of look more at the factors in the Pacific. How to look at those aspects of it, how to make sure that the future, as we move forward, and I'm not talking about future and long future, within a year or two, where does Iran, for example, fall? Because Iran right now is in concert, very close concert with Russia, and not as close with China, but it's happening in trying to change the whole world order led by the United States. So the future of this conflict will have an impact on how the trajectory goes, because Iran is doing also the bidding of Russia. They're doing each other's biddings. I mean, Iran is producing drones inside Russia and they're selling it to them. But there is, as I say, there's another level here, and if you would, at the 30,000-foot level. If you look down from there, this has way more ramifications for the future of what we call the major power competition, or the outlook of how the world will look like in the future. So I think we need to be cognizant of that. And sometimes we say Middle East, and people care about Israel, or some people care about everybody else. Hamas, there are people dying in Gaza, there are innocent Palestinians dying, and those are all legitimate. I think we forget in the analytical world and the educational world to look at this, that this is part and parcel of major power competition, and much more than we see it today, but it has direct effect on it. So I just wanted to open that for the thinking audience. But with that, I thank you for leading these discussions, and this is by no means over. I think how it will turn out is a decision will be made in Jerusalem, Tehran, and elsewhere, not in my mind.
So Dr. Tarzi, Dr. Anzalone, thank you both again for your time and your insight. And thank you to those who are going to join us in the future on Spotify and YouTube. That's all we have for this episode. So go ahead and carry out the plan of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us. As always, we depend on support and feedback from the Team Krulak community to constantly improve our offerings and reach a wider audience. So if you have feedback on this episode, please take a moment to fill out the survey linked in the show notes to help us do better. Also, if you have enjoyed this episode, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel on YouTube, or leave us a review on the podcast app of your choice. It truly does help us reach a wider audience. Thank you as always for your support, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Education is what's important. Training, preparation for the expected. Education, preparation for the unexpected.